everyone. Happy Thursday. Welcome to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show. Today, we're talking about accessibility, specifically the accessibility of your website. So, we're going to cover what it is, how to figure out how accessible your website is, and what actions to take. And so, before we kick it off, Chris, I usually kick it off with you. But, John, I actually want to kick it off with you this week and just sort of ask you if I said to you, what is the accessibility of the Marketing Over Coffee website? Like, what would you say would be like the bare minimum of things, or what do you think is the understanding of marketers in terms of how accessible their website should be?
Oh yeah, no, this is a real gear grinder, right? Like most marketers have no idea how accessible their website is. Like they would say, "Oh yeah, we got that covered," but the reality is, like if you go in and look, maybe it's half done on a good day, and there's a lot of broken stuff. But there's like one for me that I do make sure works that is important, and that is always on forms the tabbing order. For any form you have on your website, all of the site readers and even somebody that just uses keyboard alone, not mouse, they need to be able to fill out a form. They should be able to type and tab and have it go to the next field. And it should do those all in order and end at the submit button so that somebody that has, is not able to mouse can actually stay on the keyboard and get the form done. And that's the only one where I don't budge on because you're killing your conversions there. Like that's, you're like excluding 20% of the world from buying your thing. So that's the big one. But otherwise, yeah, no, it's a total mess. And so, yeah, I'm excited to hear what Chris throws out as far as solutions and process, because it has never been anything but a complete cluster on any site I've ever worked on.
It's funny. I didn't even really think about the tabbing through the forms, but as someone who used to do data entry and didn't have a mouse, I just had the keyboard. That was primarily how I navigated through the system, which was, through tabbing. And it reminds me, this morning, I was on my town website trying to pay my water bill. And the way that the tabbing works is it'll go from field to little question mark, like the question mark being like the explainer. And I'm like, just let me get to the next thing. Because in my brain, I should just be able to tab through, but it stops at all these other fields first. So I think that that's a really, really great call out, John. So thank you for that. So Chris, as I always ask, where do you want to start?
Well, and as I typically say, let's start with some definitions. Accessibility refers to the capability of a website to allow multiple technologies and means of access, right? So for the hearing impaired, if there's, audio content, there's some for anything that you have on site, there's some alternative. For example, closed captions on videos would be a good example of that. For the vision impaired, there's the ability to use screen readers and other navigational technologies and so on and so forth. For people who are not substantially impaired but have some impairment, for example, just as I get older, I notice like I need the fonts to be a little bit larger on things. And so having stuff being, options available, partly user side, but also partly site side designs that support that, so that regardless of whether or not a person has some kind of impairment, they can still do business with you. The CDC, the U.S. Center for Disease Control, said that in 2019, in their census data, approximately 5% of Americans had some kind of hearing impairment, 5% had some kind of vision impairment, and about 13% had some type of cognitive impairment. So when you put it all together, approximately 25% of the population, give or take, has some kind of need for assistive technologies, whether or not they know it, whether or not they use it. And as marketers, we have to logically ask the questions, do we want their business, right? Because when we look at stuff like search engine optimization and email marketing, all these channels that are focused on driving traffic, once somebody arrives at our property, if we immediately just piss them off by making our site unusable to them, we've wasted time and effort and money.
So, and I would say to that, we do want their business. The services that we provide to marketers and businesses is not tailored to completely able people. Like anyone should have good marketing, should have good data. Like this applies to anyone who is in that field, regardless of your abilities and like it doesn't matter to us. So we want to make sure that our site and our content and our assets are as accessible as possible. So go ahead and give me the bad news. How bad is our website?
Well, let's talk about the different options for what you can do. Because I would categorize, accessibility testing into sort of three broad categories. So there's, just the basics. There is sort of more standards-based focus, and then there's automation. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the different examples that we might be using to understand a site. One of the first places to go, the W3C has a web accessibility initiative. They have hundreds of different testing tools that allow you to test out a website and look for violations of standards. So these are international standards that have been put together for accessibility in terms of how a site should look and things like that. And this list of tools that you can choose the standard that applies to you and your nation. The WCAG, the Content Accessibility Guidelines, typically is considered sort of the best in class. And if you can meet that, then you can meet most everything else. You can look for tools that you pay for, tools that are free, etc., and so on and so forth. But probably the easiest place for a lot of people to start, especially if you've got a Windows computer or a Mac or a Linux computer, anything that has a command line, is actually just with a good old-fashioned text-based web browser. So you may or may not have these installed on your computer, but if there's so many of them, they're really relatively straightforward to use, and they're free. Almost all of them are free. So I'm going to start with, let's do the Trust Insights website. So I'm just going to put in this, and this is what comes up. So the question that we would have to ask is this what we want people to be able to do? So there's immediately a sort of a skip to content thing there. There's some navigation. I can, as you talk about, scroll through or tab through, look at what's happening behind the scenes here, and then
I see. So this is giving us just the text-based version of our website. Without images, without clickable buttons, those kinds of things. This is what someone coming to our website that's just text-based would see.
Exactly. This is also what a screen reader would see. So for someone with visual impairment, this is what it would attempt to read aloud.
Okay.
As John was saying, there's the forms and things like that, being able to tab through form fields and so on and so forth.
I mean, your command box is not very vision friendly, I'll be honest. It's I'm struggling to see what's even on your screen, so that in and of itself is a problem.
Red green colorblind.
Yeah. Oh, the
exactly.
irony.
Oh, the irony. But this is essentially what is our site looks like to a screen reader. And if this were to be read aloud, this is what would be happening. So is there anything, that I guess the first question is there anything that is egregiously wrong here? I would say it's not wrong, but the important part that, from a marketing perspective, which is the contact form and stuff, is several screens down, like to navigate down to it. That may or may not be something we want to address. But more important, when you look at just this first top half of the page, this doesn't really convey a whole lot of information about who we are and what we do. Right?
This is so funny. No, I have to jump in because if I had seen this and this had come up, this is already a B. Like I've seen so many websites that it just comes up with the meta tag and the rest of it's all broken. Like the fact that you can even just, we're Trust Insights and this is a website, this is a huge win so far. Right.
So here's an exercise. Close your eyes. Everyone close your eyes. I'm going to read this aloud as if I were a screen reader. And you tell me if you know who Trust Insights is and what we do. Main navigation, Trust Insights. About, what we do, insights, blog, contact, pragmatic change management. About Trust Insights. Why change management? Why Trust Insights made the pivot to a change management approach. Learn more. Trust building, team building, your purpose unites, but how is it fulfilled? Training and education, and so on and so forth. So open your eyes. Based on what you just heard, do you have a good sense of who we are and what we do?
I assume we do something with change management, because you said that at least 3 or 4 times. And so that seems like as you're reading it, obviously I know our website, so I would imagine that those are the navigation buttons at the top, and I, as a user, I would need to click into them. But what's on the homepage is a lot of information about change management.
Exactly. So now let's to John's point. Let's try a different website. Anyone got a website that you want to see?
That you want to be embarrassed about? Yeah, throw marketing over coffee on there. Let's see how bad this chokes.
I mean, you're going to have to do it anyway, John. I'm going to add it to your to-do list today.
So this is, you have Marketing Over Coffee, Marketing Podcast, the navigation menu, select page, now with more escape rooms and Jonathan Morel. And so one thing I do see here is you do see a little bit of repetition, but not too bad. Actually, all things considered, this is pretty good because this is getting people to the reason they're here, which is get right into the shows, right into the episodes. So that's not bad. Let's take
this is, again, huge win. This is way less horrible than I was expecting.
Yeah, let's take a good general business site. Let's do Apple. Let's see what apple.com looks like. But here's Apple, global navigation, some menus and stuff like that, and then you get right into some products: MacBook Air, iPhone 13, iPhone 13 Pro, and so on and so forth. And really, it doesn't get ugly until you get into that footer, which is that huge block of legal text.
Wonderful footer.
What if you did like a HubSpot, something more B2B?
Good call. Let's do that one.
Not to call it HubSpot.
I was just saying, Christina, here we go. This is it. Live or die.
But I'm thinking of, more B2B stuff.
So immediately you have your language chooser, which is a form of accessibility in and of itself. If you have the ability to offer multiple versions of your site in different languages, that's terrific. We have the About, we have the menu, software, the HubSpot CRM platform, Marketing Hub, Sales Hub. So that tells you kind of what it does and things like that. So again, this is not bad.
Right.
There are some little navigational oddities here and there, but for the most part, this looks pretty good.
Well, and what I noticed is right away, one of the first things it said was like it was more of a one-line tag. All of HubSpot's marketing, sales, CRM, customer service, CMS, and operations software on one platform. So like, oh, I know what this is.
Exactly. So far, we're not doing too badly in terms of websites, but this is an easy check, right? This is something that requires no technical skill other than getting a text-based web browser installed. And you can very quickly look at your website and go, okay, is this representative of what we would want an audience to experience, particularly an audience that was having like a screen reader read this thing aloud. If it's not, if it's really challenging or difficult to use, then you'd probably want to start there. So that's the first set of techniques. The second set of things you can do is install browser extensions that will tell you if your site is not meeting certain guidelines. So there's one by the United States government Social Security Administration called Andy, which has a little browser bookmark. You can just drop that right into your browser, and then it will list accessibility issues. Like here's all the different things and sort of alerts letting you know, hey, there's some things in here on your website, and it will highlight them when you click on them that we're having some trouble. There's some accessibility problems. We can't. There's no accessible name or inner text labels and things like that. Other things like keyboard alerts. There's something that is not tabbable down here. So this is something that should be skipped by. Again, very simple, very straightforward, easy to navigate, easy to understand. Now, this is where it gets challenging. A lot of these tools, and this is true across the board, do require you to have some, I guess, web technical knowledge to understand, like, even what is this thing telling you? This is saying, hey, this has no accessibility name on this link. Well, if you don't know HTML and CSS, this is not going to be super helpful.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that was going to be my next question, is what kind of level of understanding do you need to have of how these errors and alerts are given to you? So we had been talking about this a little bit last week, and that was my first question to you is, I don't know what any of this means. And so I'm going to spend a lot of my time on search engines, copying and pasting the exact message, put it into the search engine and try to figure out what it means. And then I'm going to try to figure out what the heck to do about it, because maybe I'm not the person who should be messing with the PHP on my website, as we learned this morning.
So yeah, and across the board for these tools, they do require some understanding of the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript and stuff to some degree, so that you understand what's broken and what needs to be fixed. And there's really not any getting around that. A lot of the time, what's going on behind the scenes is stuff that your website designer and developer would be the ones who would need to fix it. Particularly if you're a larger company, you would have your design team, you give them this list and say, hey, our site failed, all these things, go fix it. One of the, I guess, positive things is that these tools look at all the design pieces, but so many websites are using a CMS of some kind, like WordPress, for example, that if you fix it in the theme itself, you fix it on pretty much every page. So even though your site may have thousands of issues, it might be something you fix once and on one template, and a lot of it goes away.
Fingers crossed. That's the point.
Another terrific tool, IBM has what's called the Equal Access Accessibility Checker. It's a Chrome extension. You plug it into Chrome and then have it scan. You go to a page on your website, have summarize those same things. Here's what's going on with your website, and those are things you would need to go and fix. The one thing I like about IBM's is that they explain why this particular element is important. It says this is important so that you, when you're navigating with the keyboard, you know what to fix, and then it tells you the sort of the element location about where on your site that is, so that you could hand that to a developer and say, hey, go fix this thing.
Yeah, and I think the why is always incredibly important, because you may make some business decisions to say that's not an important thing for our website to be able to do based on who our target audience is, which is a totally valid conversation to have. You don't need to be everything to everyone. But as I think about the breakdown of business to consumer websites versus business to business websites, I can see those being very different conversations, where business to consumer, majority of them are trying to sell something, and consumers come in, all walks of life and all ability levels. And so I would imagine that's, I won't say it's 100% more important for a consumer site, but it is likely, a different set of priorities in terms of the accessibility than a B2B site.
Right.
Oh, that's good. So what you were talking about there too. So you've got a CSS declaration. Like if you fix that one tag, those 8 errors all go.
Exactly. The other thing that's nice about IBM is that theirs differentiates importance. So you have violations, like these are standards violations. These are problems. You have you need to review it. It might or might not be a violation, and then you just have notices and recommendations. So from a compliance perspective, especially if you are funded by government entities or you take government funding, you have to fix the violations. If you don't, you're probably in violation of one or more points of your contracts, because if you look at a lot of contracts that businesses sign with governments, accessibility are part of the mandates. So
when I worked at my previous company, where we did get a lot of grant funding, that was one of the stipulations of the parent company website, was that it had to meet all of these accessibility regulations. And so that became a big part of our design and web development team. So it would be like, we would almost kind of have like assigned task force members to make sure and be checking for those things, because it's not a skill set everybody on the team is going to have or be familiar with. So we assigned the understanding of those regulations to specific team members who were then in charge of making sure that we were always up to date.
Exactly. So these tools help us to look at an individual page. The other thing that you can do is you can have these tools do automated site scans. And there are, again, many, many companies that can do this. There's a long list here over on the W3C. You can use the open source tools if you have some coding experience. There's companies like Site Improve, for example, that have automated tools that are cloud-based that can do the sort of summary, easy summarization, and then make it simple to look at. I've been using the IBM one programmatically, and what it does is it goes through and scans the entire site that you have. You give it all its pages, and it puts together these long reports on every single page on your site. Classifies violation level, the specific things, the help page if you want to look at the help documents, where that is on your site. So this one, form control element, has input has no associated label. So that for that one, John, that one's on Marketing Over Coffee. There's a form that lacks some tags, so that would be one that tops your list of. We need to fix our forms to make them as good as possible. From a accessibility perspective, again, this is all the same data, but being able to scale, one of the things that I would suggest people do is take your data out of something like Search Console or Google Analytics on a page-by-page basis, and the pages that get the most traffic, use that to prioritize where your accessibility efforts start. Make sure the most important pages are the ones that are in the best condition.
I'm guessing probably things like about us and contact us and what we do. If you have it set up from the get-go as part of your web design strategy, it's probably more straightforward. But if you are an older site, you do have to prioritize that way, especially if you are maybe an enterprise-sized company and your site is built, stacks and stacks and stacks on top of each other. You just keep adding on to it. You probably 100% need to prioritize the most important pages.
Definitely. And I mean, I think there's a relatively straightforward ways to approach that stuff too. If you were to go into, say, a content attribution analysis, like, our most valuable pages report, those top pages, like the newsletter subscription page, the contact page, the home page, the ones that drive conversions, that's got to top your list we got to make sure these pages are accessible. One other thing that I think is worth pointing out too is that the way accessibility works, when you're making a site more accessible, you are in effect making it easier for machines like screen readers and things to navigate your site. Well, there's another machine that likes to read sites too, called Google. And Google's crawlers, if you read the technical details of how Google works, of how it crawls a site, the first thing it does is it grabs all the HTML, it reduces it down to its core form, and then it puts it into its indexing platform. The more accessible your site is, the easier time the crawler has with it, the less time it spends on that page, because everything's ordered and structured and nice and neat. And the more likely it is to catch everything and not miss chunks of your page versus a site that is not accessible, where you got leftover Flash from the early 2000s and random animations and things. That doesn't help. And it doesn't feed Google either. So if you want to improve your accessibility, you will also improve your search. In yesterday's Trust Insights newsletter, for those folks who missed it, one of the things we looked at was, does accessibility have any impact whatsoever on search, right? On the ability for your site to be found? And the answer is yes. It's not super strong, but if we look at, I really can't see that. That's tough to read. I'm not going to put that
unlike
graphic
your
up.
terminal browser.
Exactly. It's not like our terminal browser. That's even harder to read. But in terms of the factors that lead to showing up with, having a decent number of impressions in Search Console, the lack of violations for accessibility was the number 3 factor that we found. Inbound links and website traffic obviously were the first two, but the number 3 was lack of violations, which speaks to the importance of accessibility in making sure Google says, yeah, I can understand what's on your site.
Well, and I think that this goes back to understanding your audience and who it is that you're trying to appeal to. And so we're talking about 2 different things. We're talking about humans and we're talking about machines. And so first and foremost, you need to decide who's your audience, where do they hang out, what do they care about. If your audience is purely on social media, for example, on Twitter, on Facebook, whatever list of social media platform, you may not necessarily care as much about the accessibility for a search engine like Google or Bing or any of the other ones. So it may not be important because that's not how your audience is finding you. So it just doesn't matter. Conversely, if search is one of your stronger channels or you want it to be, then you need to make sure you're accessible both for humans and for machines.
Exactly. So what are some things that you can do to improve your accessibility? One of the most important things is when you are having a site be designed or redesigned, make accessibility part of the RFP, part of the requirements, part of the deliverables, to say like your design must pass WCAG guidelines. If it doesn't, then the job's not done. Because what can happen is you may get a design back, and then when you dig into that design and start looking at all the code, you may have a hard time figuring out, okay, well, how do I fix the accessibility issues? Like we have a custom design theme, and it's going to take a little bit to dig through this, right? To dig through all the different style sheets that are in here and figure, okay, well, how do we, what changes do we need to make, and how do we dig through how many lines of CSS is this? We have 11,571 lines of CSS to go through and figure out what's wrong in our site to go make it accessible.
So, no big deal. But, that goes back to, we need to make a collective decision of how accessible we want our site to be to machines and to humans. And, you could say, well, I need everyone to be able to access it. But quite honestly, that's not true. So we need to make some decisions about what is the most important parts of that accessibility. Obviously, text readers is an important part of it, the form fills, those kinds of things. But we need to decide for our company what those priorities are instead of trying to do it all. Because, to your point, those 11,000 some odd lines of code, the chances of something breaking are high. Just gonna put that out there, and so if we're not being methodical about it, if we're not being pragmatic around choosing what we decide to change and fix, if we're not bringing in, website experts and designers, we could quite honestly just really hose our website, and that would do the opposite of what we're trying to do. Just, putting that out there.
Yeah, no, but I think that's a valid point. But I guess the main message would be, when opportunities come up to have a site redesigned stuff, making sure that accessibility is baked into your contracts. That way, it's part and parcel of the design considerations and not something that you have to do retroactively and go, how are we going to not break our website? Like, no, it's part of the business requirements up front.
So, John, I know that the Marketing Over Coffee website, honestly, it's really just sort of like a house for people to come to find out about the podcast and get access to the podcast. So in terms of accessibility, you had mentioned being able to tab through forms. Like, what are the things that you feel would be the most important to a Marketing Over Coffee potential listener in terms of accessibility?
Yeah, no, I'm psyched that that's a huge hit, because really it is just get a list of the episodes and who the guests are and be able to get to the files. So, we're just lucky in that it's an incredibly simple process. The one that is probably a total mess, in fact, I know for a fact it is a mess, is the newsletter thing has changed. I have new vendors in there. In fact, because I was noticing that one high on the list that was screwed up, that was from 2010. So I'm sure that's like a form going to an email vendor that probably doesn't even exist anymore. And so that's where the cleanup needs to get done on the sign up. But as long as the shows are good, at least where, people can get to what they want. The business is not in good shape, but at least the customers can, get what they need to get to, which is critical.
Yeah. One of the things I like about the summaries that, again, what some of the IBM tools do is they kind of give you just a general score on a per page basis to say, like, this page is in 83% of it is in good condition. If you were to, let's pop back here to this page, give this one a scan, the home page, 79%, right? So there are spots here and there that are in good shape. Let's take a look at our hosts page here. Do a quick scan on that, 80%. And I know there's one page, I believe, the archives page, that has some issues. with it. Is also an extremely large page, which in itself is kind of an accessibility narrative. This one scores 68%. So
2,000 violations,
yeah, in terms of pages, we might want to fix this one. This one's
this one is great. Like, again, this is like, I'm shocked this still works at all. Like, I haven't touched this page in 7+ years, and the fact that it does at least still put everything up there is a miracle in itself.
So that's half the battle, John.
just showing up is at least. But yeah, that is hilarious that there's so I have 3,200 things I need to check out on this page. Got a pretty full to-do list when it comes to this.
So, in terms of getting started, I know that, WordPress and other CMS systems make it pretty straightforward for you to add like alt text to images, for example. That should become part of your regular process. And so the alt text, if you're unaware, is what a text reader would describe a picture as. So if I put up a picture of the three of us, my alt text might say something like the Trust Insights team hosting their weekly live stream, kind of a thing. Just so if the machine is asked to describe what's in the picture, it doesn't just say, so what? And then the text, and then the person who's trying to understand the context, like, so what? I don't get it.
Exactly. No, some of the low-hanging fruit, the easy stuff is obviously making clear navigation. Alt tags and alt text, labels on things, tables in particular. If you're using tables in your website, make sure there's table headers and column headers and things like that. Straightforward stuff. For any kind of video, there should always be closed captions. Again, that's one of those things where, in terms of overlap, there's overlap between accessibility and SEO. If you give YouTube, if you host your videos on YouTube and you give YouTube a closed captions file, it then doesn't have to try and transcribe it itself. And if it's got keywords that you care about, like when we do the Trust Insights podcast and we're talking about big data analytics, well, guess what? That SRT file, that the subtitles file, is filled with our keywords, so that when Google goes and scans it, and then you search on YouTube for big data analytics, we now have a chance of showing up for that terms. So all these accessibility things, there's a lot of overlap with SEO. So prioritize using your data from Search Console and Google Analytics. The most popular pages, those are the ones that you should tune up first. Take care of the easy stuff, and then consult with your design team about whether it's whether you can retroactively patch stuff, or whether it's time to do a redesign anyway and make accessibility a linchpin of the new design.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with that. And, always at least understanding your audience and who it is that you want to be reaching, and if so, the accessibility issues are part of that audience, then obviously you should probably get on it right away, because you're missing out on that audience already.
Exactly. And there's something there that's called a non-response bias that I think is really important for marketers to consider. A non-response bias occurs in surveying when the percentage of the audience that does not respond is statistically different than this percentage of audience that does respond. And when that happens, you then have biases in your data. If your site has no accessibility whatsoever, the percentage of people who just leave your site and never come back may be substantially statistically different than the people who stick around because of accessibility issues. Mm-hmm. And so you may have some hidden non-response bias in your data itself. You may not be accounting for it. So to improve that, to increase the chances of getting a full picture of your audience, make sure that accessibility is built into what you do.
Totally makes sense. So know who you're trying to reach, take a look at your website, prioritize your pages, and then, John, get started. Start doing it.
Fix the 2,700 violations.
I don't know why you're still here. You got a lot of work to do.
Any final thoughts before we roll out?
Go forth and do good work.
All right. We'll all talk to you all next week. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and our weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.